Everyone, welcome back. We are continuing our Missing Manatee reading with Chapter 8 today. Just a reminder before we get started, please have your detective notebook or a piece of paper out. That way you can jot down some ideas, maybe some questions that you might have, okay? Some things that need to be solved. We're going to be doing this for the rest of the year. It's nice and handy to maybe even mark it off as your Missing Manatee section. Okay, so grab that notebook so you're ready to write down some clues. All right, and as always, I want to remind you of our elements of mystery. However, we are only focusing on one right now, which is our suspect, okay? And our suspect is Dirty Dan. So we will be looking at these within different chapters, but right now, just focusing on suspect. All right, so before we move on to Chapter 8, we're going to do a little recap of Chapter 7. So the first part of Chapter 7, Skeet was very excited to go tarpon fishing still. Okay, so he's still thinking about it. He's excited. The next part, he goes over to Lenny's house and he gets to chat with him a little bit, which is kind of nice. He gets to talk to somebody at his own age level. But unfortunately, Lenny is going to Tampa to go visit his grandparents for the rest of the summer. So he's not going to be around. But at least they are able to talk about the missing manatee and then talk about the pet peeves assignment. After that, Skeet goes to his dad's house, Mac's house, that evening to get ready for, fishing with Dirty Dan. And there, Deputy Earl and Dirty Dan are playing poker, okay? And here we kind of see, the side of Dirty Dan, how rough he is. He's been in fights before. He has scars. So we can see he's kind of rugged. And then what's interesting about this chapter is they have that poker game, the kind of rough poker game. Well, it's not rough poker game, but you kind of see what type of person Dirty Dan is. A ruffian. He has a scar from a hatchet fight, okay, or supposed hatchet fight. And then we go over to a part where Dirty Dan is kind of like a teacher or a mentor, and he's able to kind of help Skeet and say, hey, look, this is what's wrong with your fishing reel. Let's fix this. So it's an interesting juxtaposition of the two sides of the character, okay? And juxtaposition means that you're comparing those two. They're put together to kind of compare. So first, he's not a really good character, and then, oh, he's a really good mentor. He cares, really strong. So it's interesting how they put those things together. Well, we're going to jump into another comparison of the character with Chapter 8. So in Chapter 8, we finally get to go tarpon fishing. And, Skeet is excited, but he's also dealing with not knowing how to handle it, okay? So he's something brand new. And he knew, oh, hey, I can fish. But tarpon fishing is a whole different level, okay? So what you're going to focus on in this chapter is how we're going to compare how Dirty Dan is again, okay? And think about how almost what Skeet expects Dirty Dan to do and then what Dirty Dan does, okay? So he expects him to act a certain way, and then all of a sudden Dirty Dan's just a different person, okay? So there's a couple questions I'm gonna ask you at the end. I'll kind of explain it at the end to help you out, but just really pay attention to how our Dirty Dan character is perceived, okay? How he acts, what Skeet thinks of him, and different things that happen during the context of this chapter, okay? Enjoy, guys. I'll see you at the end. All right, so before we start reading Chapter 8, we're going to go over a little bit of info/vocabulary time. And why I say info/vocabulary is because some of this isn't vocabulary, but it's definitely info you need to know. So the first bit of info you need to know is Dirty Dan's boat. And Skeet says Dirty Dan's boat is smaller than his skiff and also smaller than Mac's boat. So as you can see, it's basically a tarpon boat, okay, and that's why it's smaller. It's made specifically for tarpon fishing, and it, I guess, floats in about 6 feet of water. That's what they said in the book. It's not made to go out into the Gulf and go into deeper water. The other part of that is they said they're going to go fishing on the flats. Okay, and fishing on the flats is basically saying they're going to fish in shallow water. So to kind of point out this a little bit, they talk a little bit about being in a grassy area. I'm going to circle that right here. This would be like a grassy area. You can see it's kind of hard to see. It's a little murky. It's a little hard to see the fish. But when they get to a sandy area, it's much more clearer. And I'll point out right here how you know it's clearer, besides the fact of just looking, is we can see a fish. Okay, so it makes it much easier to see the fish. Next word to go over is Bluebird Day. And Bluebird Day, Dirty Dan basically, he pulls the boat out into the water and says, "Ooh, this is a bluebird day." And Skeet says it's a little cloudy. So what that gives us is a bluebird day is kind of a perfect blue sky day. And what that means is very little clouds in the sky. If there were more clouds and it was a little windy or maybe a little stormy, the water would be rougher, so it would be harder for them to fish. And that's why most fishermen want that bluebird day. Okay, moving on to vocabulary. Silverfish. So Dirty Dan keeps saying, you're going to get your silverfish, don't worry. Well, a silverfish is just a nickname for a tarpon, okay? And I found a picture of two tarpons that was a painting of two tarpons. So I thought this was really cool because it shows them low to the ground, kind of, you know, just coasting through the water. So it was really cool looking. And then the next one is fishing push-pull, okay? And the fishing push-pull we've seen before. I've zoomed in a little bit more so you could see it. But basically, fishermen are going to use a push-pull because they don't want to start their engine up and scare the fish away. So it's for positioning the boat quietly, such as nudging into a shallow flat, okay? And then the next vocabulary word I want to go over is quivery, okay? And Dirty Dan describes the water as being quivery, okay, kind of nervous, like it's shaking. And this is to describe the fish moving around in the water. Now, keep in mind, before I show you this picture, the water is not as still. Like, the water could probably be kind of like the water you see right there with the flats. But I wanted to show you with a still picture so you could see the quivering of the water. So right here is a picture of a fish. And I'm gonna do it in purple so we can see the difference. Obviously, I'm pretty sure you can see it, but if you look right there, you can see the purple and kind of like the little rifts or the trembling of the water. That's a fish moving around. Now imagine that water kind of moving a little bit rather than just being flat. It's hard to figure out what is water and what is waves. So that's what Skeet is going to be trying to, you know, find. Like, he can't see where the fish is under the water, but Dirty Dan spots it like that, okay? So, yay, we're finally getting to our fishing trip with Dirty Dan. We're going to get the first part, which is kind of interesting. Just to give you a little information, I am going to ask you some questions on how Dirty Dan is still portrayed. So pay attention to how he acts and how Skeet kind of sees him this chapter as well. Okay, enjoy your reading, guys.
Chapter 8. I ate a quick breakfast and got to the dock at 10 minutes to 6 the next morning. Dirty Dan was already in his boat arranging my rod in the side compartment where it would be safe once we got moving. Dan had a boat that was specially made for fishing on the flats, the big areas of shallow water where tarpon often feed. It was much smaller than Mac's boat or even my skiff and could run in only 6 inches of water. On its side were the words Tarpon Man. "Push us off and let's go, Skeet," he said without taking his eyes off what he was doing. "We got ourselves a bluebird day." I looked at the sky. It was still dark, with only the faintest sign of light in the east, and I could see the glitter of stars. When you're hunting for tarpon in the shallows, you need to be able to see them. You want a bright, clear sky with no clouds, and that was what we had, or would have when the sun got higher. "Great," I said. I unhooked the bow and stern lines from the cleats on the dock and hopped into the boat. Dan cranked up the engine, and we motored slowly through the restricted part of the river, sending herons, egrets, and cormorants into lazy flight. Mac and most of the other guides were just meeting their clients at the marina or having a last cup of coffee at Betty's diner, so we were the first boat to head out. I loved the river at this time of morning when it was quiet and peaceful with a haze of fog hanging over it. I could hardly believe that the day I'd thought so much about was actually happening. When we left the refuge area of the river, Dan opened it up and we sped through the curves and zigzags. We were hauling. The boat itself wasn't much, but Dan's engine was huge. He hollered over the noise. "There's a big silver king out here with your name on it, Skeet." I was already smiling from the speed and excitement, but I could feel my grin grow wider at that. We came to the mouth of the river and ran out in the Gulf for about 45 minutes. Then Dan pulled up to a long, deserted stretch of shoreline and cut the engine. He picked up his push-pole and jumped up onto the platform above the motor. He was quick for a guy Meemaw's age. Immediately he began to use the pole to move the boat slowly and quietly across the shallow water, his eyes scanning the surface intently. "Now hand me my butterfly milk, Skeet, and let's catch you a tarpon." I was surprised not only because it seemed a little early for a drink, but also because Mac never drank when he had a client in his boat. Some guys did, but Mac said it was asking for trouble. I wasn't a client, though. I opened the cooler thinking I'd get a glimpse of what Dan had brought for our lunch. There was nothing inside except the bottle of Jack Daniels, a moldy hunk of cheese in a baggie, some chewed-up tarpon flies, and a near-empty jar of mustard. I handed Dirty Dan the bottle and asked, "Where's the rest of the stuff?" "Up in the storage compartment?" But Dan didn't seem to hear me. He was so focused on the water. I got my rod and stood up in my place on the bow. I looked back at Dan and said, "This is so great, I sure wish I could pay you." "You catch a tarpon, Skeet, that'll be pay enough." He took a drink from the bottle, set it down between his feet, and kept poling. "Okay now, till the sun gets higher, we're looking for rollers," he said. "You see any, tell me where and which direction they're heading in, and I'll try to get you in a position to cast." I'd read as much as I could about tarpon and asked Mac about 1,000,000 questions over the years, so I knew about rollers. Tarpon are weird in the fish world because they come up sometimes to breathe. When they break the surface to grab a gulp of air, it's called rolling. You can see their backs then, or maybe a glimpse of a dorsal fin, and you can also tell which way they're swimming. Spotting rollers sounds easier than it is. They're up for only a second, and it takes a lot of experience to be able to tell which direction they're heading, an experience that I didn't have. I never saw anything, even though I was looking hard. But a minute later Dan said, "There!" He began poling faster, but just as sneakily toward whatever he had seen. "Oh, they're high and happy, exactly the way we want 'em, Skeet." I squinted my eyes, but didn't see anything. "Okay, get ready. There's fish coming. See that nervous water?" When fish are moving, the water above them looks different, sort of quivery or nervous. I've seen it sometimes when Max pointed it out to me, times when the water was dead calm and glassy. But today there was enough of a breeze to give the entire surface a ripple, and all the water looked quivery. I nodded, but the truth was I didn't see what he was talking about. As far as I could tell, the only thing that was nervous was me. "They're coming left to right at 2 o'clock. About 120 feet. You see 'em?" My heart was pounding like crazy. Dan's directions were perfectly clear, or should have been. I knew that if the boat was a clock face, the bow where I stood was 12 o'clock. But I was so anxious that I had to stop and picture a clock and think about whether 2 o'clock was to my left or my right. Right, okay, but forget about calculating 120 feet. Instead, I turned to see where Dan was looking. Okay, they're at 100 feet. "You ready?" asked Dan. "Yeah." I started to lift my rod to cast. "No, not yet. Wait till they're closer. You see 'em?" "No," I had admitted desperately. 1 o'clock now. 80 feet out. Okay, get ready. Ready? Go ahead and cast now." I did, but my timing was way off. Instead of landing softly and enticingly in the fish's path, the fly landed with an ugly splat right on top of them. They spooked and took off, leaving only a muddy swirl where they had been. Casting to a real fish sure was different from casting to a pop can in the yard. Dan took a sip from the bottle. "Sorry," I muttered miserably. "No sweat, Skeet," he said calmly. "You'll get the next one. The important thing is learning from your mistakes. Do you know what you did wrong?" "Everything," I said. Dan didn't disagree. He just asked, what was the main thing? I thought for a minute. "I never really saw the fish before I made the cast," I admitted. Dan nodded. You'll get better at spotting 'em as the day goes on, he said. For right now, you don't have to see 'em as long as you put the fly where I tell you. Now what kept you from doing that? Jitters mostly, I guess. It happens. You'll settle down. Dan was more confident of my improvement than I was. Take another cast, he directed. 40 feet, 9 o'clock. I did my best. 60 feet, 11 o'clock. We did this for a while. After every cast, Dan helped me figure out what I had done wrong. I was concentrating like crazy, and he was watching me real closely and analyzing every move I made. Then he took the rod. See that gob of seaweed floating over there, he asked. Yeah. I'm going to cast toward it. Watch how the line lays out on the water. He made a beautiful smooth cast. The fly and all the line landed lightly and delicately on the surface at the same time. Wow, I said, that was perfect. Now this time watch my back cast. To get that nice soft landing, you got to keep your loop tight on the back cast and time your forward cast just right. Wow, I said again after he demonstrated. That was amazing. What else was there to say? Dirty Dan wasn't known as the tarpon man for nothing. If he'd been casting to a fish, there was no way he wouldn't have caught it. He handed the rod back. Okay, you try. I made some more casts. They were all embarrassing, but Dan managed to find something encouraging to say after each one. I could feel myself beginning to relax a little. The sun was pretty high in the sky by then, and Dan said, Okay, Skeet, you got your jitters out. The visibility's good. We're going to move to another spot. Okay, I said, where are we going? You'll see, he said, taking a drink from the bottle and setting it between his legs as he sat at the wheel. I thought about blindfolding you, but I figure I can trust you, seeing you as you're Mac's kid. I nodded eagerly. Of course you understand that if you ever tell anybody about this spot, I'll have to kill you. I laughed, then looked at Dan's face. I thought I saw a smile tickle the corners of his mouth, but I wasn't sure. I laughed again, a little nervously this time. Don't worry, my lips are sealed, I said. He nodded approvingly. That's the way, Skeet. Some things just ought to stay secret.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed Chapter 8. Just got a couple questions for you, and I'm going to explain them before you start your quiz. So the first question says, what role is Dirty Dan playing for Skeet in this chapter? And what this means is, by role, is basically how would you describe Dirty Dan's role towards Skeet? So would you describe him as a teacher, as a coach, a fatherly figure, a mentor? And how, like, why would you describe him this way? So he's a fatherly figure because of this, or he's a mentor because of this? To describe that for question number 1. The next one says, how does Skeet feel about Dirty Dan's comment at the end of the book? Okay, on page 83. So right here, it says, Dirty Dan was like, of course, you understand that if you ever tell anybody about this spot, I'll have to kill you. Okay, so it's kind of like you think he's joking around, but there's not that smirk or there's not that laughter. And you know, it makes Skeet a little uneasy. So how do you feel about that comment? Explain that in a sentence. Next question is, do you think Skeet is enjoying tarpon fishing so far? So explain why or why not Skeet would feel a certain way about tarpon fishing right now. And then the last part is kind of getting your opinion, but I kind of want you to use the descriptions of what's going on in the scene. Would you enjoy tarpon fishing? Why or why not? So when you go to explain that, hey, I would enjoy tarpon fishing because of this, or I wouldn't enjoy tarpon fishing because of this. So give me a good reason and explain why or why not. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed Chapter 8. Go ahead and answer that quiz, and we'll see you tomorrow with Chapter 9.